It's time for Taking Care of Business on Midlands 103. With thanks to the local enterprise offices of Laois, Offaly and Westmeath. Find us on localenterprise.ie and Let's Talk Business.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Taking Care of Business. Hopefully you're in out of the west, you're in out of the rain, and maybe it might be nice and mild wherever you are across the Midlands or across the country. Good to have you with me this evening. Coming up on the show over the next hour, we're going to look at tariffs and trade deals again and look how global politics is now shaping Irish business costs in real time. John Finn of Treasury Solutions and the Treasury Hub will analyse what trade tensions, Mercosur and that new EU-India trade deal struck today really mean for Midlands SMEs in the year ahead. Also, is artificial intelligence about to rewrite how careers begin? HR expert Caroline Reidy will be here to explain why many employers plan to reduce graduate hiring, what this means for entry-level jobs and how workers and business can adapt in the age of AI. There is comprehensive data to suggest that graduate roles are being significantly impacted by AI. Find out just how much very, very shortly. And we're going to go to a man in Mullingar who has achieved national acclaim once again because award-winning photographer Noel McIntyre of Motion Picture will be here to talk about his creative journey, the art of reportage photography and how visual storytelling can elevate your business. So all that coming up over the next hour. If you want to be part of the show and part of this evening's conversation, you can get me the quickest and easiest ways by text or WhatsApp on 083 3010 103, powered of course by the home of Offaly's top selling car brand Lamb Brothers Toyota on the Arden Road in Tullamore. But before that this evening, ask you to cast your mind back to about 2 weeks ago. I was speaking to David Broderick from the Small Firms Association about their strategic report for the years ahead, or their strategic plan, and we spoke about the many things that are a bit of a pain in the ass for Irish businesses, some of which were the changes in payroll, the changes in holiday leave entitlements, etc., and a lot of stuff we've discussed on this show. David also spoke about procurement, and one thing that arose in that discussion was the lengths that SMEs are being asked to go to now in terms of showing, number one, that they have sustainability practices, but even more than that not only have they got those practices and policies, but they're actually measuring their sustainability, their carbon footprint, and measuring what reductions they're bringing in business. And David said that it was quite an arduous task for really any small business. So I have some good news this evening because the Laois Offaly Education and Training Board has launched a new programme for small businesses, and it's all about embedding sustainability into your business. Gillian Peters is the CEO of Pragmatica and she's the lead deliverer on this course. And Gillian joins me now. Good evening, Gillian.
Good evening, Ronan, to you and your listeners.
Gillian, I suppose I mentioned there how David spoke about, things like looking at sustainability now, particularly when it comes to public procurement. It's becoming a bit of a challenge and a chore and maybe an overly arduous task for many businesses. Is some of that the reason why a programme like this has been brought about?
That is probably one of the main reasons, to be honest with you, on why this programme has been brought about. I suppose from Pragmatica's perspective, we work with SMEs on a daily basis. And we were seeing them struggle in terms of the amount of information or the amount of requests for this information that was coming through. And really, I suppose it depends on the size of your company. The SMEs can be anything from 11 to 250. But certainly the larger SMEs, they're feeling this more because I suppose they're higher up the supply chain in terms of what it is these larger businesses are looking for from their supply chain. And then this is having this cascading effect then through. So the programme was really developed to move SMEs away from a very reactive state into a proactive state. So it's really about looking at the business analysis. So even leaving sustainability aside for a moment, but looking at your wider organisational strategy, and you're asking yourself the why. And this programme is all about the why and then the move into the how. So the first module last week, and the programme will be run in the next number of months as well, was around that org strategy. So if you take a simple, any organisational strategy, I suppose, and some of the goals that they might have within it, growth would always be a goal within an organisational strategy. So how do you retain your customers? Because it's not just about winning the new business. If you're in the supply chain, if you're caught up in the sustainable procurement, how do you retain those customers? And then you go on to, okay, how can I win new business by looking at my business through this sustainability lens? So we have 12 different modules on the programme, and they're all built in such a way that it's very practical for business. We're giving them the tools, the resources, everything they need to bring this back to their business, that they can really start to embed and build a sustainability strategy that will take them from this reactive to proactive state.
So really, for a lot of businesses, actually, it's as much about being competitive than just being forced by regulation, because for a lot of smaller business, the regulations don't directly apply yet. This is really about just being out there and being ahead of your customers.
Exactly. I suppose all SMEs struggle with a certain amount of things. You know, it's the cash flow, it's the resources, the time, etc. And many SMEs want to do this. Unfortunately, they don't have the resources to do it. So it is about looking at what it is we need to do now and into the future to really, really make sure our organisations are resilient enough for the future when it comes to sustainability.
When it comes to designing that programme, then how do you make sure it really fits the needs of those very SMEs that we speak about?
We went through quite a rigorous process. So it was ourselves, LOETB, we had a steering group as well, and that steering group were brilliant in terms of feeding into the programme and the different modules that we should have on it. So we had different size companies on the steering group from different sectors, from construction to retail to services, and they fed into the programme in terms of the module length. So even at one stage we were 2-hour modules, now we've gone to 4-hour modules. They fed into the workbooks that were created as part of the module development. The programme is developed in such a way that it is 12 modules, but there's 3 different distinct phases. So phase 1 is around strategy and foundation. So it's your why, how you measure your sustainability, looking at implementing those strategies and ESG certifications, which is a big one actually coming down through the supply chain. EcoVadis, if any of your listeners haven't heard of it, you take some of the larger retailers as an example, they're looking for their suppliers to have this certification. Then you've time to reflect on action between that module and the next module, which is about operational excellence and the circular economy. So that looks at things like circular economy, waste prevention, carbon footprint measurement, life cycle assessment, and supply chain management. And then that third phase is around the reporting mechanism. So how do I communicate with my stakeholders? It's around lean thinking for innovative sustainability, EMSs, and the final module intentionally is around ESG reporting. Yes, SMEs do not have this mandatory reporting, but they're in the supply chain of businesses that might. And there is a new framework coming out, and maybe it's a conversation for another show called the VSME, which is a voluntary framework for SMEs, but it helps them bring all of the information that's required for a larger business into this voluntary SME report.
So a business owner might be looking at, they might have certain ambitions around sustainability and this will help them take action, but it actually sounds like as well they're really future-proofing the business for future contracts and what's coming down the line. Who exactly are you aiming at then within the business? Is it the owner, senior management, or what type of people have signed up for this already?
So the people who've signed up for it already, they're quite broad actually. So you do have some CEOs of businesses, you have some founders on the programme as well. But then we've got a few people from larger businesses, the larger SMEs, let's call it that. They may already have sustainability resources. They may already have a sustainability strategy, but they have gaps in their resources. So they're upskilling their teams to be able to respond to their customer requests, etc. So it is actually quite broad because it is at the door of every business. So for any SMEs in the Laois Offaly area, this is certainly open to them.
And as you said, the course has kicked off, but there are going to be future rounds of it too. But it is still open for applications. How can people find out more about it? And really, what's that call to action for any business owner that's listening this evening?
Yes, so the call to action is, yes, it will be kicking off in a couple of months' time again. And LOETB are very passionate, I suppose, about supporting businesses in the area. So if any owner, any business is interested in it, they can go to the LOETB website. It's on their website. Look at their usual social media links. And if anyone wants to email Pragmatica, hello@pragmatica.ie, we're dealing with queries coming through as well.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's going to resonate with a lot of people because it's becoming so much part of the conversation on the show week on week about those needs to be able to at least demonstrate that you're taking action, that you're in control of what you're trying to do in terms of sustainability and really embedding it into the business. Gillian, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Undoubtedly, I think there'll be plenty of emails hitting into the inbox overnight from that one. Thanks a million, Gillian.
Thank you, Ronan.
That's Gillian Peters there, the CEO of Pragmatica, delivering that programme for LOETB there. So there you go, LOETB.ie, or just check out Pragmatica and get in touch with that if sustainability is something that you are passionate or indeed feel you need to embed into your business. That is potentially a great starting point. Now, time for a quick break. After that, is AI really affecting graduate hiring and graduate jobs? Are opportunities disappearing because of big tech? Find out in just a couple of seconds.
Taking care of business with thanks to the local enterprise offices of Laois, Offaly and Westmeath. Find us on localenterprise.ie and let's talk business.
Still to come, I'll be speaking to the award-winning photographer from Mullingar who specialises in the business of storytelling. He's a man from a strong family business background in that area too, and he picked up another national award last week. And we'll take a look at the impact of trade deals, what it does in terms of stocks and commodities and currencies around the world, and what that means for our businesses here in the Midlands. But before that, is AI playing a huge role in terms of reducing the number of graduates that companies are hiring? Is it actually closing the door on an entry-level job and the beginnings of a career for people? And what impact is that having? Well, let's explore that with Caroline Reidy. Caroline is the founder of the HR Suite, now part of NFP, an Aon company. They're a specialist in people and insurance risk management, and they look at creating sustainable solutions both locally and internationally for organisations and employees. Caroline, good evening and welcome to Taking Care of Business.
A pleasure as always, Ronan.
Caroline, we can't get away from artificial intelligence, and the latest now, and there's quite a bit of data and analysis around this, is that it is having a huge impact in the number of job roles being available for graduates. Tell us more.
So I suppose we've definitely seen that the pace of AI that has entered the job market in terms of replacing roles has been at a pace we couldn't have possibly anticipated. And what's happening is roles like, for example, if you're coming in as a graduate trainee accountant, the jobs you were given to do of basic administration and basic skills, now you're pushing them through an AI tool and your job is to spot check them, which has reduced the amount of time dramatically. And ultimately, the stats tell us it has reduced the amount of entry-level people required to do those jobs, hence reducing some of those entry-level roles. On a positive, I suppose, Ronan, what it's doing is making those jobs more interesting for those lucky enough to get them. But the challenge is there's possibly fewer as a result of AI being unbelievably efficient at doing those types of jobs.
And I guess that evolution of AI, if somebody is employed to merely spot check, in time AI will become so strong and powerful it probably doesn't need anybody to do the spot checking. But this is all backed up by the Randstad Work Monitor 2026 report, and it's saying that 38% of employers plan to hire fewer graduates in the coming year, and 41% of employees now believe entry-level roles could disappear within 5 years. Surely we're not going to see that impact.
I think it could even be faster, Ronan, if I'm being honest. I really think the pace we've seen AI and the LLM models, like ChatGPT, Copilot, etc., being integrated into the work environment, it's been faster than we could have ever imagined. And I was at a talk last week around the AI evolution, and I thought it was really interesting that they were saying, if you're not going to take on board the AI, you're going to be left behind. So you're either going to be a passenger or a pilot. So what's really important to employees in general is that they start really upskilling, and organisations similarly upskilling their team in terms of becoming really efficient at using and maximising AI tools, particularly things like Copilot. Like we've seen the civil service, for example, roll out now the fact that they're acceptable in terms of what's used and what's not, because they see it as a tool that if they don't use it, employees will be using it anyway, and some may not be using it to its full potential. But we still need to be really conscious of the kink of hallucinations, which means that it mightn't be accurate all of the time. So we definitely need to be sense checking it. And, we've seen loads of cases where people have just put something into AI. What it's spat out, we accept as fact. Yet remember, I suppose, garbage in, garbage out. So it's got to be making sure that, first of all, we're using the right version of the technology to suit your business, because there are some more suited to specific businesses than others. And secondly, we upskill the team to make sure they're maximizing its use. I know in our own business, we got an expert in who she specializes in Copilot to train us to identify opportunities where we can really add value. And for example, we do a lot of training, and we would be using a lot of policies to train people, like dignity and respect or board training, etc. And we'd be incorporating company policy into it. Whereas now AI does that. AI will take a document, put it into PowerPoint slides. You can tell it what kind of tone, what kind of font, etc. But I think what's really crucial is it's a starting point. It's cutting out a load of time, but then the human needs to add the finesse, the tone, tailor it to suit the company in more detail. But as time evolves, as you said, that might become more part of the offering as well.
So a lot of it could be then, if you've got, right, at the minute, right, maybe there is that drop-off, and that's been well assessed and documented, that drop-off in graduate hiring. It's the next piece, as you say, how you really, if we're affecting, say, the quality of people's starting roles or entry roles into whatever sector they're in, largely because of AI, do we need to look at how we can really further develop those people even quicker by giving them access to these AI tools, and that, say, when there is that symbiosis of both people and machine working together, we can maybe elevate them up the career ladder even quicker? Is that where we need to go with this, or where is the thinking right now?
I think that's exactly spot on, Ronan. I think the whole idea of maximizing the potential of the person, the job is more interesting for the person. Obviously, it's a huge, costly, competitive, and productivity is one of the biggest challenges for all organizations right now. So if the organization isn't taking advantage of the AI and isn't, I suppose, looking at the entry-level person coming in, like we're finding a lot more people now are being interviewed around what skills and proficiency they have at being able to maximize the use of AI. And before, we'd be giving people tests to do that they would have to computate something in their head to manage their numeric skills or their verbal skills. Now people are saying, well, let's give them the use of the AI tool to help them do this task, to see, does that make them more efficient? Because those that are more efficient in getting the task done and not compromising on quality or accuracy are actually of adding more value. And we're lucky that this graduate generation, AI and LLMs are part of everything that they do, and so much so that the organizational restructuring that's happening also to make way for this new wave of technology is definitely another factor that's happening as well.
Absolutely, playing a huge role. Who would have thought a year or two ago we'd be having such discussions around artificial intelligence and the role it can play and where it's taken both companies and careers. From an SME perspective, you deal a lot yourself in that kind of mitigating risk within a business. There's clearly risks there. You mentioned about choosing the correct the correct AI tool. How are businesses now really looking at how they make sure employees are properly trained and are aware of the various tools that are out there, and that they're not using something that maybe is effectively sharing either company data or customer data across the internet or the dark web? Absolutely.
And I think giving people permission, firstly, to use it, but use it in the correct way and be conscious of what the issues are. I remember going back, to the early stages of the introduction of AI. There was a guy working as a graduate in an organization, and his job was to copyright and, draft articles for websites. And the company manager was like, he's doing it at such a space and knots, this is exceptional. But he was one of the early adopters to AI. But the problem was he wasn't tweaking it and fine tuning it. So the customer was able to identify this is not done by a human. And I suppose that's the risk of not giving people permission or not giving people the training and the tools to say, look, in our organisation, these are the parameters, these are the boundaries, but we absolutely want to get the value and the increase in efficiency, etc. And I think what's another key thing is if we don't disrupt our own business by introducing AI, upskilling people, looking at different roles for graduates and current employees who might do those type of jobs, then ultimately the industry is being disrupted because competitors will be able to provide a more efficient service, a quicker service, a cheaper service. So you will be left behind. So I suppose the advice really is disrupt or be disrupted and make sure you're bringing your employees on that journey proactively with you.
And that's a very fair statement, and it's actually one that's applicable to both a very large business, but right down to the smallest business, a business of one or two people. The tools are there, the access is there. Even the subscription fee for a ChatGPT package is probably $120 a year. So the tools are there for everybody.
Absolutely. And I think as well what's been groundbreaking in terms of the introduction of this technology is it's at your fingertips. It's available, it's easy to use, it's easy to adopt, it's easy to integrate. So even just using the example of an accountancy firm, not using it to maximise the potential that's there to use it means you are being disadvantaged, you will be left behind. And I suppose, you know, we're seeing now that companies who do the prompts really, really well and, you know, have a database of prompts within their organisations, that's becoming intellectual property of value to an organisation, which, you know, wasn't heard of 12 to 18 months ago. And I think, you know, when we look a leap forward and we see things like robotic pets, my two King Charles dogs, I think could never be replaced. However, we're seeing things like robotic dogs. We're seeing healthcare, you know, interventions in neurosurgery. We're seeing, you know, huge advances by using AI, etc. So I think everybody says we can see what's possible from now to 2030, but beyond that, we have no idea because it's a limitless opportunity.
Limitless, but an opportunity nonetheless. Caroline, a pleasure as always. Thank you for that. And let us know when you get your first robotic dog or first pet, and we'll have it.
I'm resisting. I couldn't possibly contemplate it.
Yeah, no, some things I think it might be a step too far. Caroline, thanks as always. That's Caroline Reidy there of the NFP group as well. So interesting perspective on AI. They're replacing graduate jobs, but as you see where the conversation swings towards, you need to start disrupting or somebody else will disrupt you. So are you looking at AI tools? Are you using them? I heard of a almost ingenious use of AI today, that somebody asked AI to come up with a list of companies that were speaking to each other through LinkedIn about a particular product in order that they might be able to join that conversation and pitch their product. So sometimes you got to think outside the box. What are those prompts you can ask AI to do that could be a game changer for your business? Now, time for a quick break. After that, we're going to look at what all the kind of talk and upheaval and the whole taco most of everything, trade deals, Mercosur, the EU-India trade deal. What does all that mean when it comes to stocks and shares and commodities and currencies? And what does that mean for your business?
Taking care of business with thanks to the local enterprise offices of Laois, Offaly and Westmeath. Find us on localenterprise.ie and let's talk business.
Well, one thing that we can't get away from these days is talks of trade negotiations and tariff threats and geopolitical tensions. And even though they can often seem like distant politics, now they're already beginning to shape the costs, the currencies and competitiveness of Irish businesses. John Finn is the CEO of Treasury Solutions and a founder of the Treasury Hub, which includes Athlone headquartered RBK. He's a proud Longford man and is regularly seen around the Midlands giving keynote speeches. And you'll know from the show over the past couple of years anyway, has great insights into the worlds of stock, shares, commodities and currencies as well. John is here to try and briefly unpack how global trade developments are filtering through to real-world business decisions and what our SME should be doing now to protect themselves and plan for the year ahead. John, good evening and welcome back to Taking Care of Business.
Thanks, Ronan. Good to be back.
John, it's a bit of an extensive subject and there is so much we could talk about, but just give us a bit of a snapshot from your perspective of somebody who is involved in this area all the time. The talk of all these global trade tariffs and these trade agreements and that, does it impact immediately on things like currencies and commodities, or is it still like the old way, it can take a while for the changes to filter through?
Yeah, I suppose there's two things that you think about straight away here. One is uncertainty. Okay, and uncertainty leads to lack of confidence from consumers to spend, lack of confidence in businesses to invest, and in general, financial markets. It doesn't matter whether they're, what element of the financial markets, they tend not to like uncertainty. So the fact that we've had so much toing and froing, tariffs going to be gone from 10 to 20 to 30% back down again. That creates, as I said, an environment that's not good for business in general. And as you've probably seen, and your listeners would have seen and heard as well, Ronan, the fact is that with so much of this stateside driven, it's inevitable then that people are looking eastwards again. And, you can see China on the agenda. In fact, Keir Starmer is over for the UK in China at the minute. And I suppose you'll be looking at India, Asia, and all those places,
That's it. India, of course, described today like the mother of all trade deals apparently signed. And last week's show, David Savage from Deloitte said how the Mercosur area is about 700 million people. India represents a market of about 2 billion people. Hence why you can understand why eyes are certainly turning eastwards.
Oh, yeah. And bear in mind, from a population perspective alone, China's population has peaked. Now, of course, what China does have is, as a result of all the economic strength over the last 20, 30 years, is it has an emerged middle class, which middle class obviously have more money to spend, and particularly in the last couple of years, spending a lot on Western goods because they go for the brands and the quality in that sense. Whereas India is obviously lagging behind, so higher population, but probably lower spend per head. And of course, the other one that has not been mentioned at all is that the biggest increase in population forecast over the next 25 years will be in the continent of Africa. So, the world is changing in that trade sense in terms of where the opportunities are likely to be over the next decade or two.
Yeah, and the Middle East as well emerging as a real powerhouse in terms of that kind of economic centre, and maybe some of those old centres like London and places maybe might lose some of their clout in years to come too. So definitely a huge shift on out there. But all this talk of tariffs, I suppose, referred particularly to the US, the market, like all the signalling, the political signalling that goes on, does the market still react like it did in the early days when Trump came in, or now are people just taking it as, let's see what happens tomorrow? It doesn't take long now for him to maybe back down on threats. Like, are people actually are the markets taking those tariff threats seriously?
You're right. There's been so many threats, and of course, it's like anything. If you threaten too often and don't follow through, your threats don't get taken seriously. However, that being said, there's the volatility to his decision making in that sense. He can turn the tap off and on again in terms of whether he wants to do deals or doesn't. But certainly, if you looked at, say, the stock markets, which would be probably the bellwether that he looks at the most in the States, the stock market is not falling in the States. In fact, the Nasdaq was still up, I think, 19% last year. Now, admittedly, not up as much as the FTSE or the ISEC, but that's because the others had lagged over the previous years. Whereas the Nasdaq, has been pushed by the seven large multinationals, in kind of tech and AI space. But what is interesting to see, I suppose, the first thing that happened that was noticeable last year with the tariffs was the dollar weakened. So the dollar started the year January 2025 around 103, dipped under 102 at one stage, ended the year at 117. Now, most of that movement happened in the first 6 months of the year, Ronan, which is not a surprise when you think about I suppose the global economy trying to get their head around tariffs and what might happen. So you had a big move from 103 to 117, which is a significant weakening in the dollar, which is bad news for exporters to the US from here. And it kind of stayed in a reasonably tight range for the second half of the year, which mirrors exactly what you're saying about the market maybe, taking it in its stride and not reacting. But it's noticeable, even in the last couple of days now, the dollar's gone from 117 to 119 this evening, and there's a little bit of a move again. And as I said, they're not going to affect. The good news, in theory, of that will be, for example, anything that's priced in dollars, for example, fuel, and a lot of the commodities should come down in price in euros, relatively speaking, because they're cheaper in euro terms. But of course, there's still an underlying commodity price risk as well. But that probably is the one that moved quickly and then kind of stabilised. But it's beginning to move a little bit again, and so we got to keep an eye on it in that perspective, because we've so many Irish businesses still do business in the States. And the other thing to remember too, which people sometimes forget, and you mentioned the Middle East emerging as a powerhouse, and clearly it is because of oil money. Most of those Middle Eastern currencies are actually hitched to the dollar. You know, they're actually linked almost. They don't move. A lot of them hardly move against the dollar. Meaning again that if we have Irish companies, for example, looking to sell stuff into the Middle East and being paid in those currencies, it's effectively the same as being paid in the dollar, and they'll take a hit to their margins as well.
Your quarterly reports from the Treasury Hub, you look at the value of things like gold and silver and the age-old commodities out in the market. Gold took a surge in value there recently. Is that a sign that people are putting their money there just to try and ward off the volatility that's out there?
Yeah, it's funny. We I think I put it in, I'm going to say maybe 3.5 years ago, Ronan, initially. And really gold was seen as a kind of a hedge against a slowing economy. So when the markets had a sense that maybe economies were slowing, you'd see money shift out of other assets and into gold, and the price of gold would rise. But a couple of things have happened in the last 18, 24 months. One is China began to shift assets out of US treasuries and things like that into gold, which obviously gave it a boost. A lot of the central banks are after boosting their gold reserves as well. So that obviously gives it a boost. And you do certainly have that fear still at a macro level of, well, this thing could still blow up. You know, the price, I mean, the equities are such a high value in the States at the minute. Big question marks over, you know, the I suppose an element of financial engineering certainly been suggested, a la Enron, for some of the deals been done. And the sheer numbers as well, like one of the analysts in JP Morgan did something before Christmas, and he was saying that, you know, there's deals been mentioned in the billions, you know, for companies that are not making billions in profits, and, you know, data center requirements that run into just enormous amounts of energy, and none of which are built yet. You know, so that itself is a challenge. You know, it looks frothy, you know. And but gold, because of that, has continued to rise. It ended the year at just over $4,300, and it's nearly at $5,100 this evening again. So as long as you see that continuing surge, that does tell you that at a certain macro level, you got investors internationally still worried about what could blow up, particularly in the States.
Unless, of course, Mr. Trump finds a huge deposit of gold in Greenland, but we won't go there this evening.
Not unless you want another hour.
No, there we go. And, but I suppose for any business, right, you know, a business can control geopolitics, but they can control preparedness to some degree. What can SMEs do to protect themselves against kind of trade-driven volatility?
Yeah, okay. So for the SMEs, let's look at in broad terms. Like interest rates have come down last year. No upward pressure immediate on interest rates in 2026. Okay, so that's good news. The dollar and sterling are both weakened. Dollar looks like it's going to be under further pressure. And of course, interest rates are still going to come down in the first half, at least of 26, in the UK and in the US, which would suggest that those currencies might further weaken on that basis alone against the euro. I suppose you got to hedge. You know, the currencies have moved a lot, so you're now under pressure if you're an exporter to the States, and to a lesser extent the UK. To, I suppose, the margin that was there in the last 2 or 3 years is you're going to lose about 3 to 4% in the UK, and a lot more actually in the States, 10%. What we're seeing, particularly, the one worry that I would have is that when you see increased risk and in the world, as it were, you see banks have reduced appetite for risk, okay? Which means that in turn then that the availability of credit can tighten. And if you look at the data, Ron, it's incredible actually if you look at the lending data. I mean, obviously we blew everything out of the water in 06, 7 and 8. But just to give you a couple of stats from the central bank, the level of borrowing by Irish companies, okay? Now, not companies operating in Ireland, you know, as in international, Irish companies alone hit 160 billion in 2008, okay? Today, that comparable figure, or the last set of data, which is September, 34 billion is the comparable figure, okay? Now, again, just to put that in some perspective, in 2003, which is 5 years before the peak, it was at 50 billion. So the level of debt in the economy is incredibly low. And if you were to adjust that for GDP or inflation, you're probably looking at the level of debt last seen here in 1998, 99, and deposits have gone the other way. So you have a lot of cash out there, but sitting on deposit, not been utilised per se, because interest rates are very low. And you have I suppose, a corporate market in general here that is very reluctant to borrow. And of course, on top of that, then, if you have banks then going risk off and tightening up on credit, that's only going to put further pressure on companies to borrow less, let's say, and hoard cash. And in a lot of cases, what's happening is companies over the last number of years are just growing at the pace they can fund themselves. In other words, they're not increasing the borrowing. Now, I'm not advocating people going out and going mad like they did before, but all I'm saying is there's probably a certain level of debt and borrowing and investment in the economy that is good for it, to drive it on. And it looks like we're under borrowed at the minute, and I don't see any pressure from the banks. In fact, quite the opposite. They're probably making very handy money at the minute on deposits, because they can put it on deposit with the ECB at 2% and charge a lot less and take no credit risk. Because if they put it with the ECB, they're going to get the money back. Mm-hmm. So you have an environment where credit could tighten. There's definitely going to be an increase in banks looking at things like financial covenants and having more of them. So financial covenants are financial ratios that they build into your loan agreements, and you've got to comply with them. And if you breach them, you're in default in your loan agreement, okay? Larger companies are very used to doing them because, it's just, it would be standard for larger companies to have them. You'll have them in loans probably from 2-3 million up to 10 million anyway. But I'm seeing that becoming tighter. And also there are, depending on which bank you talk to, the consequences for either breaching these covenants or even requesting a waiver, which can happen, which is the right thing to do, by the way. In other words, if you think you might have a problem, you always should speak to the bank in advance of it being a problem. That's what you'd always do. But that even could have negative consequences. Now, the banking environment in particular, I see as a major weakness in the economy right now. Mm. So companies are going to have to mind their cash, make sure they don't breach their loan agreements. And if they're going to look for new money, either to refinance existing facilities or to borrow for new investment, I would say they're going to have to allow themselves maybe 6 to 8 weeks longer than they might otherwise do. It's going to be slower. They're going to have to prep better, and they're probably going to have to negotiate a bit more effectively as well. Yeah, interesting. And that's not good for Ireland Inc. run.
Yeah, but when you paint it in that picture, all right, you can see that, and it kind of links back to what I spoke to David Broderick about 2 weeks ago as well. They were calling for effectively like a state lending bank for SMEs, really to try and unlock some of that money that is held up, be it in deposit or whatever. So interesting to hear your perspective on it there too. John, it's a pleasure as always. Thank you so much for taking a very complex subject and distilling it down and talking to us about what it means both on the ground for our SMEs and how maybe they can look at again, safeguarding, being prepared for whatever volatility is coming. John, thanks again. Talk to you again soon.
My pleasure. Thanks, Ronan.
That's John Finn there from Treasury Solutions and a co-founder the founder of the Treasury Hub too. So, interesting indeed. As an SME owner, there's a lot to be watching out for and a lot to be trying to protect your business against. And it's nice to try and get an overview of what's happening out there across the trade with these trade agreements and with commodities and currencies and how you can protect that business. But that's that key question again. How can we unlock that funding to allow Irish businesses grow to the capacity that they have the capacity and ability to grow to, but they just need the money. So definitely more in that conversation to come. Time for me to take a quick break. After that though, going to meet award-winning photographer from Westmeath who really excels in the business of storytelling.
Taking care of business with thanks to the local enterprise offices of Laois, Offaly and Westmeath. Find us on localenterprise.ie and let's talk business.
Every great business and brand has a story, yet we know that, we're told that constantly. But some of the most powerful storytellers use images rather than words. Noel McIntyre is founder of Motion Picture in Mullingar, and he's just been named IPPVA Reportage Photographer of the Year for 2026. Noel joins me now to talk about the art and business of photography and how he turned his craft into a successful creative business and what powerful visual storytelling can do for your brand and for individuals alike. Good evening, Noel, and welcome back to Taking Care of Business.
Ronan, thanks for having me on.
And firstly, congratulations. Is this the second year that you've got that award?
Well, Ronan, it's been a particularly good year. It's the third year in a row I've won that award from the IPPVA. And actually, to top it off there, one of those images came third place in the World Sports Photography Awards. On the 16th of January there, I got that news. So that's sort of a pretty big deal now for me.
Fantastic. And I mean, for a lot of stuff like that, you clearly you have an eye for detail. You've got a deep passion for photography. To get that level of recognition is unbelievable, and it must mean the world to you as well. Just give us an idea, though. What is reported photography? Just give us a quick overview for anyone listening.
Well, I was just thinking about this there, and I think I can trace back my passion for this back to when we were kids at home in the old house. My dad subscribed to the National Geographic for years, and there was hundreds of them around the place, and it really was the iPad of our day. And I use it as a reference many, many times, and it definitely inspired me. I think it's the root of my inspiration. And reportage photography is really observing the world as we see it, it's observing rather than directing. And I shoot a lot of my stuff these days on Leica cameras, and they have a belief rather than it's not a tagline, it's a belief, and it is the world deserves witness. And I'm very motivated, and I get great satisfaction out of just going out onto the street or an ordinary scene or any moment of everyday life and just taking a photograph and really, an image that tells a story or captures a moment in time that's never going to be repeated. I find that really, really satisfying at this stage in my journey.
Of course, people listening will know the name McIntyre, particularly in Mullingar business circles too. And I suppose that combined with finding those National Geographics. By the way, I have a box of them in my office that I just cannot throw out, and I just refuse to get rid because there's such amazing publications. But that has led you down that line of really doing that visual storytelling piece for businesses too, because you've had that great insight from your own family business too. What do you typically do for your customers then in a business context, and how do you really elevate their brand and almost bringing out that story without trying to curate it or direct it too much?
Yeah, well, it's exactly that. And if I just start that answer by going back to my day in the car trade, from about 15 years of age, I was selling cars. Or at least I was in that environment. And, way back then, it was about making a connection with the client. You made the connection and the business followed. If there was no connection, there was no sale. That was just simple as that. And, nowadays, when I go in and, over the years, I made a lot of commercial videos for companies, and I would go in and sit down and say, look, I need to spend time here, and I need to really become invisible in this environment, and I just need to really feel the DNA and feel the culture. And when you do that, and when you become invisible, and that is a particular skill, to be able to talk to people and put them at ease, and it's something I've developed really, really well. You would be amazed that how the natural culture and DNA and passion for businesses can be brought out in either a video or in this case an image or a series of images. And it's really is something like Instagram today. You're seeing that reels need to be imperfect. There's millions of people around the world trying to perfect the imperfect reel to try and gain followers, but that's actually because people connect with reality. They connect with. It takes two people to do business. You just have to make the connection, and I think I have perfected that over the years. And as I say, it all came from a lifetime connecting with people in the car game.
Yeah, because you think of most businesses, most companies, every employee has their own personal story, their own background story, their own unique skill set, personality characteristics. Capturing that in photography, capturing them in flow of just doing their day job, obviously has huge benefits for the business, even as just a historical record, but certainly from branding, but obviously brings you great joy too.
It brings me great satisfaction. It just reminds me of a video I made about one of the very first videos I made 4 or 5 years ago, a commercial video, and it was sponsored by the IDA and Leo, the Enterprise Board. Leo were involved, and they sent me down to this company in Ballymahan. The guy was a welder, and he said, "Geez, Noel, I don't know what you're coming down here for. I don't have any story, And I said, look, I'm just going to go down and spend a bit of time there and have a look around and see what happens. And I was chatting away, and he began to become at ease in my company, and he began to kind of talk to me naturally. And he said to me, oh yeah, well, I was on the oil rigs for 15 years, but I always wanted my own business, you know. And the guy didn't know it, but I was just there. I was like, this is magic. That's what, you know, I'm good at that. You know, you can get, this guy had a fantastic story, and, you know, it took me to bring it to life. And I'm happy to say I'm pretty good at that.
Absolutely, and we know you are, and it's not just because of the national awards, which you don't just pick up for no reason, but it's exactly that. And I think we've a shared passion there, because there's not a business owner that doesn't come on the show that doesn't have an element of their story that they drop on you, and it's a bit like your customer's experience with the oil rig. You're kind of going, wow, it's an element, and then you try to piece together then what is it that got them to where they are, and it really is fascinating. And maybe sometimes we're missing that in the kind of storytelling of businesses.
Yeah, and they surprise themselves then, and they can leave then with a newfound confidence as well. You know, it's amazing.
That's it. It's like I've seen it even in a HR review in a company, and somebody says, has anybody ever done this? And it transpires that somebody has been the chairperson of their local GA club for the last 10 years and they've a skill set that nobody knew about, you know. So I think it is so important to tap into that, tap into the people, tap into those stories. And, Noel, again, just huge congratulations from myself and all of us here in Midlands 103 on those recent awards. Undoubtedly more to come. And thank you for coming out with me this evening.
Ronan, thank you.
Not all, an absolute pleasure. There you go. Noel McIntyre there. Motion picture based in Mullingar, scooping yet more national awards for his phenomenal photography work, and even a world award as well. Third place for Sports Image of the Year. Fascinating stuff. Check out Noel's Instagram or check out his website there just to see all that. Right, that's it from me for this evening. Time for me to vacate. Joe Cooney is chomping at the bit to get in and bring you the best of Irish and American country music. Huge thank you to John Finn of Treasury Solutions, to Noel McIntyre there from Motion Picture in Mullingar, Caroline Reidy speaking about AI in the workplace and doing away with graduate jobs potentially, and also to Gillian Peters talking about that new sustainability programme for LOETB. I'll chat to you all next week.